I think the industry is stagnating. I think it's been hurt and it doesn't know how to heal itself because I think it has the conundrum of still making loads of money.
What's the current situation with the industry right now? Why is the industry so obsessed with safe bets? Today I'm joined by a former Team17 executive and creative leader who's now helping studios and tech innovators bring bold ideas to market and how to scale original IPs and rethink commercial strategy.
We're seeing consumer spending increasing, growth of segments within the industry. But then if you look at the behind the scenes, like the engine house that makes the games, publishes the games, delivers the games to market, that all feels very flat and very fractured.
We talked about why risk aversion is killing innovation in the games industry, and also about her journey as a fractional chief commercial officer, and why people are the real multiplier for growth.
I think we can't forget that, ultimately this industry exists because of people, which are players. That is why we are doing what we're doing. I do think people are what make this industry magic.
From someone who's relaunching the way the games industry builds, funds, and backs bold ideas, this episode's guest, founder and managing director of consultancy, Charlotte Cook. Charlotte, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We're really excited today because you've done so much. So for people who don't know at home, very quick scan of your LinkedIn. I like to do that when you have 15 years of experience because it's quite a nice journey, which we're all going to get into today. So started back in Sega in 2010, then moved into Take-Two. I'm going to tell you the titles later, everyone. Head of commercial at Genbud Digital. Then you moved into Burnout Group, senior director of sales at Skybound Games, Team17 as the global head of commercial director, and then became an angel investor. But you, throughout all of this, since 2020, being the founder and managing director of consultancy, where you're basically fractional chief commercial officer. And to recap everything for people who don't know, you've done so much at very high levels for multiple different companies. And you've also done this throughout the ups and downs of the industry. And I'm really looking forward to today's topic, which is about leadership and innovation in the games industry. So for people who maybe don't know, I want to get straight into it, Charlotte. What's the current situation with the industry right now? Why is the industry so obsessed with safe bets?
I think the industry is stagnating. I think it's been hurt and it doesn't know how to heal itself because I think it has the conundrum of still making loads of money. So we're seeing consumer spending increasing, growth of segments within the industry. But then if you look at the behind the scenes, like the engine house that makes the games, publishes the games, delivers the games to market, that all feels very flat and very fractured. And people, I think, would struggle to probably be looking at sort of a 5-year plan in some businesses because we don't know sort of what we're up against and sort of what's coming next. And I think a lot of that is the COVID boom, the boom and bust that we sort of had where we all rode this amazing wave of, people sitting at home, playing games, connecting through games. Some incredible games have been built because of these sort of social experiences that we needed in that time. But I think we've now sort of hit this brick wall and all sort of looking at each other a bit like a sort of Spider-Man meme of where do we go next? And I think when you're inside a big corporation and you're worrying about your bottom line and delivering your numbers, I think it can be even harder to look outside to kind of find that inspiration, which is kind of where we're seeing this sort of whirlpool of despair, to not be too negative, but that's sort of how it feels.
Can you also share how you know this? Because you know this very much firsthand.
Yeah, I think I've worked within businesses. I worked in businesses sort of at the pre-COVID that did see the real boom of that time. I worked on, for example, I consulted with one of the biggest games on the Roblox platform, which had huge, success with kids being at home and that becoming their sort of virtual playground. So I've seen the sort of riding high, of those periods of time. And then through, to working when I was working at Team17, where you're kind of having to structure this, sales patterns or revenue patterns or player habits that you were seeing at that time to now, which is very, very different. And I think, especially when you're in a high pressured role, when you're trying to deliver revenue, you're managing a team, you have, internal targets against you. It can be quite difficult sometimes to sort of get that wider industry picture
the incentives aren't there, right?
Picture because you end up in this in this sort of internal struggle day to day. You know, when you're turning on your laptop every day, you're looking more at what's going on for you and your business as opposed to necessarily externally. And something I've always tried to do is make sure that I have that external, you know, visibility and you know, set of sort of eyes and ears out there that you can kind of learn from what other people are doing, look at what other people are doing. It's something I was quite proud of with my team at Team17. We really did, you know, especially on the Steam platform, we worked really hard to, you know, analyze what other people were doing. I think a lot of people also looked at what we were doing, and I would have interesting conversations with other publishers sort of saying, oh, we love this thing you did with that bundle, you know, how did it work? And then we could sort of collaborate together. And I don't think that happens enough, because I think, you know, lots of people are understandably, you know, worried about their area, their job and their respective business unit.
So I want to get into a bit of your story, because I think it's quite inspirational for especially the audience that I have very specifically, because the gaming playbook, the reason I've named it that is I feel like I would love to have a resource where people can come, learn from people who've been through interesting journeys and share like what worked for them. And you very specifically became a consultant. And you also did it when a lot of other people right now are struggling with that transition. And I feel like you knew how it was before COVID and now post-COVID, and you're still making it work. So I'd love to ask you, like, when you left Team17 and took a pause, like, what actually happened? Like, what happened? Can you paint a scene for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's probably two elements to it. So the first time when I launched my consultancy in 2020, I literally quit my job. I had like a month's runway. I took a plane to South Africa because I just wanted to be somewhere that wasn't freezing cold.
Far away as well.
Yeah, literally the other side of the world. And I set it up from there on a laptop. Like and it's really easy to do. You know, registering a company in the UK is a pretty easy thing to do. But I didn't really have a plan. I just thought maybe this would be an option whilst I was looking for something else. And I really had to sort of take on whatever came my way at that point, because I was establishing myself. I was, trying to find, earn money. I was lucky that, as I said earlier, it was in that sort of COVID period where everybody was just all over the games industry and gaming expertise. And I'd just come from a business that was working really closely with brands and advertising agencies. So I had this kind of perfect storm of being able to advise brands and businesses who wanted to reach gaming audiences. And I sort of set myself up in that way. So I think timing wise, I was very lucky with how that came about. This time around, I got advice from somebody in the industry, I won't name him, but a good friend who said, don't close the consultancy down even when you work at Team17. You can keep the limited company there. You don't have to close it down even though you're doing something else over here, which was great advice because obviously it establishes the business. The business has been around for longer. It's been trading for longer. But what I found this time around is I really wanted to take the time to find the clients I wanted to work with and the projects I wanted to work on, which I think is a benefit of, growing up a bit, being a bit less sort of more gung-ho and having actually the runway to take the time to do that, but also protecting myself because, I'd come out with something that was quite stressful, physically, mentally. I needed the time to kind of really reassess. And I also didn't feel like I was probably in the best place to deliver the value I wanted for somebody at that time, because I was, my cup was half empty myself. So I needed to really think about how I could go into something, all guns blazing. So it took me probably about 3 or 4 months. I went to GDC on my own dime this year. I went to a couple of other conferences, Reboot, which I know not everybody has the luxury of doing. If you can do that, like I think if you are establishing on your own, it's so important to get yourself out there.
I ask you that with a person in mind, actually. They left a job because the studio closed down, but they were excellent. And then they wanted to basically navigate, and they were happy to have like a year of testing. So she is also on her own dime, going to conferences. And I can tell, because I've spoken with her, like it's the first few conferences aren't easy. Like, how do I navigate? What's my persona now? Because like, who am I? Because you're now just your name. You're not title, publisher. Everyone comes with assumptions. So how did you navigate the first couple? I'm wondering if you would tell yourself any advice.
It's hard because you go from I've got a friend in the industry and she always says, when I was working at Team17 and the title I had, she's like, you're the pretty girl in the room who everybody wants to, publish my games, sell their service to, da 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 da. And
you have that aura, right? You have that status, like people want to talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And my meet to match was just like ridiculous. The minute you turn it on, you just have all these meetings load up, and then you have to sort of pare it back. So conferences weirdly felt quite overwhelming, I think, when I was at Team17. What I would say to anybody in that position, and that lady in particular, is kind of embrace the lack of chaos that maybe you would have had from before. The KPIs of you need to have X amount of meetings and there needs to be X amount of this, and actually lean into it in terms of, cool, I've got an hour where I'm just sitting in a hotel lobby and there's a person sitting next to me who's doing the same, and introduce yourself and what are you here for? Where do you work? And you might have more of those sort of serendipitous interactions that when you're working in a publisher, you sometimes are closed behind on a booth, or you're in a meeting room. You wouldn't have the time to necessarily network in that way. So I think for me, I found it quite liberating again to be on my own schedule, to get to meet with people I wanted to meet with and talk to, and equally have some of those serendipitous moments and going to mixers and events that I always find it weird when you're working in a big role and you get sent to these things, because you don't get to go to the panels, you don't get to sit and listen to things because you're having meetings. So the whole kind of structure of the learning element of a lot of these events you don't get to do because you're having your 50, 60 meetings over the course of the week. So I've again
50 meetings across a week.
Oh yeah, like that would be a normal Gamescom.
So you literally just had a back-to-back meeting calendar.
Yeah,
maybe with a time to go to the toilet, not even eat. I don't think.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm alone in that. I know a lot of people who that's very, very normal for.
Wow, that's so different, because I used to do like 20 meetings a day, but then I did that once and realized, I'm not doing that again. Let me do like 5 to 10 and be really ruthless, and then have my time to roam, and then the evening mixer. But if you're doing 20 a day, then I'm guessing when you come around to do the evening mixer, you just want to go rest. Like you don't have the energy left.
And that's the thing as well. I think you kind of learn, I was representing at Gamescom this year a couple of indie publishers who were trying to get publishing deals, and you look at that and you think, my advice to them was don't do it at Gamescom. The scouts have had 20 pitches today. They don't have the mental capacity to view your game in the way that nobody does. It's not a reflection on that person. It's if you're having that many meetings, seeing that many things, you cannot be that effective by the end of the day, on top of being away from home, out late, not your normal routine has completely gone. Sometimes you're on a different time zone. So I've always said, send the material ahead of time and maybe arrange a catch up there, and then do the catch up afterwards. Keep in touch, but don't rely on that conference as the sole opportunity to get something in front of somebody you're probably their 10th meeting of the day, and they're looking at their watch thinking, when am I going to have time to grab a sandwich and get a coffee and that kind of thing. So I think it's different for different people. I think, again, the more senior I've been lucky where I've had team members that I can bring out to these conferences who can share some of the burden in terms of meetings, and that's always great. And then you can kind of regroup at the end of the day, and they'll bring me into ones where they need somebody maybe slightly more senior to be there. But yeah, I think this year I found, since leaving and doing my own thing, like the liberation of just actually having better networking. And I've met some amazing people that I just don't think I would have had the opportunity to have met before, when you were in that kind of cycle of meeting, which is the case. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. You have to obviously get your value for money if you're sending people to these conferences, but it doesn't kind of, in my opinion, allow for that maybe professional development that lots of these conferences are there to serve. That's why they run the tracks and the panels they do. It's a shame they're not attended by maybe people that would benefit from hearing them.
I guess embracing that fact, right, where you have a more open calendar. We're definitely going to be jumping around today because there's so much to talk about. So I want to be spending some time, because you mentioned a good point about what to do when to show your game. So the people listening to this who either have a game and they want to kind of promote it, because you've been through so many of these pitches, love to spend some time on what they could do. Also, people who aren't publishing a game, maybe they have some assumptions on what the process is and how it's changed, right? So I'd love to spend maybe a few minutes on that. So when it comes to publishing a game, I guess now, like, what do people believe, but what is actually the truth? I wonder if you could break some misconceptions right now.
I'm in terms of believe, I'm not sure. I think the power dynamic is still in the favor of the publisher as it stands today. if that's the route you want to go down. But I do think the emergence of self-publishing and some of the tools out there and some businesses that have leaned in more to self-publishing models where you can kind of tap into certain services. So you, for example, might need assistance with PR, but you don't need assistance with the whole
It's like more
scale of publishing. Yeah, I think that's something that has definitely changed. And I think people's expectations on that have changed. I think the biggest shift I think I've seen probably in the last 3 years is what a developer is expected to bring to the table for a publisher to sign the game is pretty much a self-publishing state. I think you're kind of expecting somebody to have self-funded it to X point where they have, a playable vertical slice or horizontal playthrough is another thing we're seeing more and more now. They've built a community, they have traction with wish lists and engagement, social media presence. So you're kind of expecting the developer to have done a lot of the heavy lifting that I think maybe 2, 3, even 4 years ago, that a lot of that expectation wouldn't have been there because that would have sat with the publisher to help, to drive from the ground up. Whereas now I think what publishers are doing is they're coming in, they're taking that, and then they're using their expertise to build on that. Obviously that isn't the case for every game, but I think it was certainly, when I was working most recently on sort of greenlighting projects, the sort of standard of what we would expect to see to give us confidence to move ahead was much more than I think it probably was 18 months ago.
Do the developers know that, you think?
I think some do. I think probably the more professional ones do, who are more established, maybe on their second, third game. I also think those guys are more set up to negotiate more with publishers because they've been there before.
They know the game.
Yeah, so I think they kind of know, and they know their worth as well. And I think, a lot of these games as well, there's high competition to sign. You've got 6 or 7 publishers all going after one game because it is hitting all of the boxes that they're all looking for. So I think that puts the developer in a real position of strength. If you are lucky to have, found that sweet spot with your game and your community where you have 6 or 7 publishers kind of fighting over you to sign it up. So I think that's changed, but I think there is potentially maybe still this misconception that you can develop a game in your bedroom, put it up on Steam and become a millionaire overnight. I think that there is still this feeling, and the work that goes into getting a game to market, whether you self-publish or whether you do it as a publisher, is incredibly hard. It's not easy. It takes a lot of time. There's a lot of systems, a lot of processes that have to go into place to make it successful. A lot of it, there is an element of luck in there as well. But I think, I still believe there is a slight sense of, that anyone can do it, which I think you don't want to discourage. It's a hard balance. You want people to be creative and put experiences out there in the world. And who knows, you could be the next.
It's like music, right? Like it's weird. For me, I don't know if you feel this, but there's a bit more entitlement that it will work in the games industry versus the traditional one like music. Like I feel it's quite normal for someone to say music's a great outlet, but how many musicians get by and how many musicians kill it? Everyone knows there's a big disparity, but music is fun to do. I feel like with games, it's almost like an expectation where, there's these ways to get funding for my game and I spend all this time on it. I'm like, I get it, but like you are competing against everyone and they have a little limitation. I wanted to talk to you about this because you mentioned in our first chat, which I found very interesting, how people don't understand how different you need to be right now, right? And I think maybe people think they have gold dust. And it's like, okay, but you have to compare it. Like you can't just look at it in isolation.
Yeah, I think you need to be, the industry has become far more financially driven. I think, you can see that in some of the closures we're seeing, impairments we're seeing across the board, projects being cancelled. These are projects that have had tens of millions of dollars invested in them, but ultimately it comes down to a bottom line of looking at it and working out that it's not sustainable for us to bring this to market because it's going to cost us another 50 million to do so. So actually we just better, hedging our bets now, closing it down and
it's crazy as an outsider to see because inside this is logical, but outside you're like, what is happening? Like how has this gone on for years and years? And like, we're not going to market this. Like, what do you mean?
And I feel like in the past, I probably wasn't senior enough to see it. I think it still happened. I just don't think it was as public as it is now. I think now there's far more publicity around it. And I think a lot of that is because of the sort of consolidation we've seen with M&A of some businesses and
Yeah.
how that's kind of been lauded up, and then it's sort of we've seen the impact of that, and also people are just generally, I think, a little bit more vocal about it now than they would have been in the past with social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, stuff like that. But yeah, I think now you really have to stand out as a commercially strong proposition. You have to. It's not just about having a great game and a great idea. It's all the components that go into what is going to make that commercially successful for a publisher to cut you that check. So that the risk they're taking on is worth it for them. And I think more than ever, what I hope is that therefore there's more of the partnership behind it, because I think both partners understand the risk, understand the market, understand the challenge, and therefore you have to work together to achieve that. So you need a really strong developer publisher relationship to get that set of results and kind of then build on it. And I think that's what I think if you're a young developer or somebody that's looking to pitch your game, I think really educating yourself on, it's not the sexiest or most exciting piece, but the financial models around it. Really do a deep dive into what makes games successful on Steam. With indie in particular, it's not always a smash hit. I've worked on games that had more success in terms of revenue in their second, third, fourth year than they did in their first year, and a lot of that was down to lifecycle management, finding that sweet price point that would engage.
Wait, do the
with
publishers
people.
know about that as well? Like a game can make revenue in 2, 3, and 4, and they expect that. Or do they always bank on like the first year?
I can't talk for all publishers. I think it would very much depend on how they're structured. I mean, obviously, generally, when you're managing a portfolio of games, you would have, if you're releasing 10 games that year, you'd probably have your 2 that you would think, right, these are going to be the breakout successes that we're going to hedge our bets on. And it's kind of quite easy to tell, with how they're trending in terms of marketing metrics, sentiment. You can see that. It doesn't always mean it's the case. You can have all of that and it's still not happen. Yeah. And sometimes you have one that you had no expectations on completely surprise you. But I think, I think most publishers that are doing active lifecycle management, which if they're not, I don't know how, but I think most of them are. You can see that from sort of the Steam promotion cycle. Would have trends and examples where they've had games that maybe haven't performed as well in the first year, but go on to do well. I've even seen games like that go on to receive, subscription deals or opportunities because of the traction they build outside of year one.
Subscription deals is like Game Pass and stuff like that?
Yeah. So it doesn't always, need to be this day one big shiny thing. It's something you can build to. And again, that's really hard. It's not an easy thing to do. You need to know how to set the price right, do your promotional cadence right, get the right visibility on there, maybe do bundling with different games to raise the profile of the game, maybe work with your marketing team to do asset relaunches or asset refreshes, re-engage with influencers. So it's still, when you sign a publishing deal, you're signing it for a significant length of time. And in my opinion, you should be working throughout the length of that deal to maximize the game for all parties, or else, why sign it in the first place?
Cool. I want to understand maybe the Greenlight process, like in your experience. So when a game gets greenlit, so in my research, we found, like, let's say Dredge, for example. If there's anything we can't talk about, let me know. I'm wondering, like, why did that get greenlit versus something that didn't get greenlit? And maybe we can see some patterns here, hopefully.
So I was there for the release of Dredge. I wasn't there for the Greenlight of Dredge. So I can't talk on Dredge in particular. But I mean, I think, again, at Team17, we had an excellent game scouting team who were incredibly thorough in the due diligence that they did of evaluating games.
At maybe the developers are forgetting about, maybe. Like, for example, keeping a slide for the financial modeling, definitely heard that advice, and I think people still don't do it properly. That's like a great example, right? I'm wondering what else could the game scout be looking at that maybe we're not considering? I
think obviously it was having a point of difference and a hook that stood out in the marketplace. So not copycats. I mean, Dredge was a good example of, after Dredge, which was sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of new genre defining, in terms of it created this kind of new genre of game that hadn't really been around before. We then started to see a lot of Dredge-like games come through because people start seeing the trends and then jump on, I'm going to make a similar type of game. And I think that was another thing we noticed in a lot of pitch decks. The same games would be listed as, the comparisons. This is my game like this game. Or a bad thing? I think I think it can be okay if you have a really standout game, but quite often it can almost be a signal of, oh, here we go again. They haven't really drilled down into what makes this game different. What are the mechanics behind it that make this different from those 6 games on the screen that you're saying your game is like? Is it truly different? And I think, again, I can only speak to my time at Team17, but it was very much about like genre, finding those sort of genre defining games and sort of true indie gems that really stood out as doing something different, bringing something new to the market. And I think there are examples, without again naming specifics, but where there were games we had signed that did try to do that maybe it was too much of trying to redefine things, that it missed the mark.
Yes.
And it can go the other way, and obviously that's the judgment call, being a game scout in any business, that you're taking that risk. But I think it was very much, did we get a good, it sounds rubbish, but did we get like a good feel? Like, did this make us feel like it was doing something different? And again, at Team17 as a portfolio business, what was it going to bring to our portfolio, but also how could we leverage our portfolio to support the game itself? Was another big thing. So if we had sort of similar crossover audiences or crossover gameplay style, more latterly as well, I started looking, again, more on the sales side, a lot at the length of gameplay, replayability, because those were things we started seeing a lot on Steam, that games that had sort of less than, averaging around 7 hours gameplay or were doing pretty well. So we started looking at, what was the average gameplay time? Did it have replayability? And then pricing as well. I would say to developers, be really open-minded about your pricing. These publishers know what they're talking about when it comes to suggesting a sweet spot for pricing. So if you think your game is worth $40 and they're saying, actually, we think this would do really well at $19.99, maybe $14.99, because that's the market it serves, you have to trust their judgment on that, because that weirdly, although it's a cut in revenue in theory and average sales price, you can make up for that with volume.
Yeah, supply and demand, right? It's all relative, especially when we get in these games that are coming out like $10 to $20. There's a term that people are using, and I see people arguing about the term like friend slot games, games that you can play with friends coming out of Sweden. They're performing very well, and like they sit between $10 and $20. So like, if all the streamers are playing a game between $10 to $20 and your game isn't streamer friendly or a game you can play with friends, then that's what you're competing against, and all the live service stuff. So I think that's a good point.
And we've taught consumers to expect that. Like, we've spent the last 10 years teaching consumers to expect it to be on Game Pass or PS Plus, to expect it to be 50% off maybe within its first 6 to 12 months of being out. So we've encouraged that kind of consumer behavior in gamers. So I think you have to therefore then adapt your strategies to know that that's how people are buying games as well. So I think it's just, I would say to caution developers with, don't go too hard on a publisher who's, genuinely looking at a pricing strategy, with a longer term view, because they know what they're dealing with in terms of the market.
Great. I'm curious. That's the way it is right now. I'm wondering, do you think there's a better way where IPs can get greenlit? Like, is there anything that you would change?
I think one of the businesses I'm working with at the minute is an IP driven business. So we're specifically focusing on building sort of an infrastructure layer for IP, and one of the big moving forces behind that is democratizing access to IP that exists today. So, I've worked with some incredible indie teams who have developed fantastic games that have gone on to do hugely successful numbers. And the budgets were less than $5 million. These are teams that are building amazing games on bootstrapping small budgets and bringing them to market with the assistance of a publisher, but then going on to do incredible things and getting global recognition. A lot of those teams, when you're looking at sort of IP based projects, they can't afford the MGs that some of these IP holders are.
What's an MG? Sorry.
A minimum guarantee. So lots of the big IPs out there will require you to pay a minimum guarantee to access their IP, just to have use of it. So you would need to pay to have use of it to layer onto whatever gameplay experience you're making. And whilst I understand that obviously from an IP protection point of view, and for big IPs, that makes total sense why you need to have that sort of MG royalty structure built in. There are some businesses out there that are sitting on tens, if not hundreds of IPs that have kind of just died. They're not doing anything anymore. And because you can't get teams to match the MG requirement, they're just sort of sitting there stagnating. But they're IPs that have huge nostalgia factor, communities that love them, maybe still adjacent transmedia projects or products that are still driving big audiences. It might be in books or comics or TV or film, but we've not opened them up to game developers to potentially use and create cool game experiences from. And I think that's something on the IP side that I'm hoping with what the work we're doing at Infinite Realms, which is very much around democratizing access to IP, but also driving efficiencies around IP use. Because
and the negotiation part is just the thing that's sapping everyone. Because I'm wondering, this is very interesting. Like if you have a great ability to make a core gameplay loop and all that, but you don't have the ability to create a whole new IP from scratch because maybe a different skill set. I'm wondering how many game developers are actively thinking, let me go find a good IP for it. Probably not that many unless they've got a bunch of money. But you think maybe even like first or second time game developers could use IPs like this in the future?
I think if the gameplay loop, it would still follow like a green lighting process in theory, but if we could get to a point where, because efficiencies are able to drive the and protections around how the IP is used, which is what the tool we're building does, it creates an LLM of that IP, which means that you can't hallucinate, you can't work outside the parameters of it. So the IP holder knows that product is true and can and compliant.
Yeah, because there's so much cost. Like to enforce the IP guidelines might not be worth unless they have the minimum guarantee.
And that's the big problem, because and I've worked in the past on games that are IP based when I worked at Sega in particular, and the back and forth of approvals was a big part of the time sink of doing it. You had to constantly be checking in. The idea with this is that removes that, because what you would be putting in the hands of a developer, the IP holder knows is 100% reflective and accurate of what they want it to be represented as, and therefore the developer can work within the parameters of that guide set of guidelines. Obviously there would still be checks and balances, but it would remove a significant portion of that. And what we're hoping to do, and what we've been doing internally ourselves, is giving opportunity for sort of what are called like below deck characters. So if you think of things like Andor or the Mandalorian in the Star Wars universe, like how do we give rise to characters that are part of gaming experiences or other transmedia experiences that people know, but they don't know that much about because they're just a below deck character in the experience they've either played or interacted with. How do we, give access to that IP to a game developer to go and build a game around that character or that city, or giving
there's a lot less back and forth as well, right? Because you just need to sort that one character out.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, so for me, I think that's where I'm hoping it goes, and I think we'll still continue to see the big IP, do well and remaster and bring out new games. But we're also working with Infinite Realms with big AAA projects as well to assist them on that part internally. So how can they come up with these concepts internally themselves as well to keep franchises and IP fresh? So I think, I hoped that we exist in a world in the next 5 years where you don't have to have a big checkbook to be able to play with beloved IP. You can just be trusted to work within pre-authorized materials that you can build some really cool experiences from on an indie budget.
Yeah, that'd be very cool. I want to ask about the people side now, because that's a huge part of your role. We haven't spent much time talking about it. So you've mentioned people are a multiplier. I'd love for you to break that down for me. Like, what did you mean by that?
I think you can't, I know there are people out there who are individual contributors and work very successfully in that way, but I have always found in my career, not only with the teams I directly manage and get to help me deliver what I need to deliver on, but also the partnerships across the industry that you have to achieve something. If you look at a game release, the amount of people that are involved in that from end to end is significant, and I've been, for example, at conferences where you meet someone and they do the facial mapping for the characters, and they're like, what do you do? And you say, I work in sales. And there's kind of two worlds colliding where you're selling what they've worked on, but they've never considered like the chain of people that get it to be in the hands of a player and ultimately somebody who's enjoying playing the game. And I think especially now with, sort of lots of concerns around AI taking jobs and, people feeling that they're going to be replaced, and you're seeing sort of studios downsizing. And I think we can't forget that, ultimately this industry exists because of people, which are players. That is why we are all doing what we're doing, and that we need those people to come on the journey with us, maybe not directly as employees, but maybe as part of our communities, engaging with community more deeply, having sort of representatives within that community that we officiate to sort of help us have leading roles there, to be, moderators. Or I worked on a game that it was a fishing game, and they called them their carp council, so people that were kind of the people that would reflect what the community was seeing into the business. And also just making sure that we're not going to get to a point where we try and strip everything back to the point that we think we don't need people because AI can do it for us, and then putting people under immense strain because they suddenly don't have that collaboration, water cooler moments that you have by working with people. And I think I've only ever worked in this industry, so I can't really talk to having worked in others, but I do think people are what make this industry magic.
Yeah,
And I've seeing ideas come together when you have a meeting with somebody and you get to just talk about something or brainstorm on a concept and actually bringing that to life. I think that's hugely important, and I think it's more than ever making sure people are doing obviously the right things within your business, but not just thinking that they're replaceable by a piece of technology.
How would you do that, Charlotte? Because I've been speaking to some people, and I won't name names or companies, but like situations where I have a kind of personal situation here where we use AI to help us with the idea generation for content, for example. So technically that could have been an extra role where someone's researching the transcript and double checking stuff, but that is kind of menial work. And in the games industry, there's people who, in their last few months, training the AI that replaces them, stuff like that. And because you've seen so many teams work, like this feels like a very challenging situation where AI does exist, but there's the reality where they're being used by people who, if they almost do them too well, would that make them replaceable? And then there's this weird balance. Like we all obviously want to make the business grow, and that is all going to that direction. But then how do we kind of navigate that? I'm wondering, like when you look at the teams that you're working with, like how would you bring people along to the journey? Like are you kind of team empower them, get tools, or like how does the incentive structure work? I'm wondering how you would look at that.
Yeah, I think it's challenging, and I think I can't speak for every area of the games industry. I think if you're working maybe in more of an art-based role or a programming role, the risk is it's probably much higher at the minute in terms of feeling like there are elements of your role that could be replaced versus I've only ever worked in sort of commercial business development side, which is very people driven. Relationships are what will ultimately help business get done, and I don't feel like an AI tool can replace a long-standing 15-year relationship that I have with somebody that's going to help me go to them to unlock something. Or at least at the minute, I don't see how it could. Maybe, who knows? It might be possible in the future.
It definitely help preparing for a conversation, but it definitely can't help the conversation part.
Absolutely. And I think what I've found, it's been really interesting coming back into being like a consultant and basically running my own business this year. I didn't have these AI tools when I did this in 2020. So if somebody sent me a lengthy contract to review, that was probably 2-3 hours of my time I was blocking out, looking at that, going through it line by line, making sure of what I was agreeing to. Whereas now you obviously have tools that you can ask it to summarize the key points for you. And I'm this, I'm this person in this contract chain. And so I think for me and with teams I've worked with, it's about driving efficiency so people can be empowered to do more of the creative stuff, to do more of the if I look back to, again, the team I had at Team17, so much of what we did was time spent doing things like promotional mapping and planning. And I think in the future, there'll be a way that can be more automated. And I think then that enables that team to spend more time maybe playing the games that we're selling so they understand them more deeply, or playing competitor games, or spending more time, on Steam, like looking at some up and coming indie titles that have put themselves on the platform and are gaining a bit of traction, so kind of having time to move away from doing the menial stuff that does still exist within roles to go and do more that actually helps drive your business forward. So more of that sort of, I guess, strategic out of the box stuff rather than the day to day. And that's how I would definitely encourage it to be used. I think it should be complementary, not replacing. And I think there's certain things it can replace that unlock time for people to go and do more exciting things, or things that are going to propel your business forward more. And that's what I've certainly think is the exciting part of where we are today. who knows what the future looks like. And yeah, to hear you've got sort of teams of people being asked to work and train things, and then they're being told, okay, now you've done a good enough job, you can go because all the knowledge and insights exist within this AI tool, and we don't need you anymore. I have a feeling that I think there's going to be some businesses out there that lean so far into it that they're going to end up almost like hiring people back because they'll realize that they can't replace people completely. I think we will see that potentially happen. But I think as well, from sort of, if you look at like the gig economy and what I'm doing now in a fractional capacity, it also opens up, maybe people don't work in a full-time capacity anymore because AI is taking over certain elements, so you can do more sort of fractional elements with different businesses where you go in and you assist them for maybe a day or two. You don't need to be there full-time because the menial stuff that you would have been doing in a full-time role isn't required anymore, and actually they just need your expertise or value sort of on top of what they're able to do underneath. But I think the crystal ball on this is so hard. Like, every day it's changing, and like the capabilities are just getting more and more impressive. And I've been using tools to do decks recently, and it can build a deck in 2 minutes. It's crazy, and that before would have again taken you 2-3 days to get to that point. So who knows? But I think my main thing would be, making sure that you're not replacing people just for the sake of hitting some kind of metric, and especially in commercial business development, I think relationships are still going to be key in the industry, and especially because we are facing this uncertain period. People want to work with people they trust and like and know are going to deliver.
Yeah.
So that's hugely important.
Sweet. Very selfishly now, I want to hear maybe about the fractional journey, because there's definitely people listening to this who want to be on that fractional journey, want to do it well. So is there anything you wish you knew when you first started doing fractional work and versus what you're doing now?
I think it's, in my case in particular, it's really easy to be, if you have people approach you and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this thing. Like, I found like I was giving a lot of time to stuff that maybe wouldn't ever go anywhere just because I felt like I should listen to the opportunity. So I think maybe doing a little bit more due diligence and background sometimes, if somebody approaches you and says, oh, I'd love to show you this thing, and just trying to work out actually, and it is okay to say to somebody, love what you're doing, like huge congratulations, but I think actually it's not the right fit with what I'm working on currently, because otherwise you can spend a lot of time just sort of canvassing potential opportunity. And also, I've definitely found this year I've had a lot of people that almost were expecting free advice, and there comes a point when it's like you're happy to get on a call and chat to somebody about something, but there comes a point of how far you can take that without saying, at this stage that there needs to be some kind of payment for this.
I usually one call. That's the kind of, it's like one call.
Yeah.
More than welcome to borrow more of my time. Here's how much that costs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that being comfortable saying that, it can feel a bit transactional, but that's what you're doing ultimately. You're
honestly, I found it really hard at the start, but now I found it very simple by using the reminder saying, I have current clients that need my time. If I need to take some of my week to service you, it's not fair for them. So it will cost this much. And I found that going from 9 to 5 in recruitment, where it's like, well, this is the task that needs to be done, go do it. We're not counting hours, we're not counting this. And just that little pivot from full-time work to fractional work is like, time is your resource now. Like, you cannot just give it freely away, because that's not fair to the people who you do over the time, whether that's family, yourself, all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you need to make sure you're balancing it. Having a work-life balance can also be quite tricky, because I think how do you
navigate that, Charlotte? Because you can always work all day. Like, there's no boss anymore. Like, I'm wondering, because I've had my own journey the last couple of years, and I know it. Like, in your prep, like we talked about how like burnout's a thing. Like, I'm going up and down. I'm a very energy-driven person. I would never thought I'd say that, but only because of yesterday, where I had a great call to start the day. It was a sales meeting. We met in a coffee shop, and it looks like it's going ahead. I noticeably have more energy for the last 2 days, and I haven't had that for like 3 weeks. I was like, why am I so dependent on if things go right? This is so bad. Like, but then I'm like, it's just so weird, because doing the stuff I know I need to do, then it saps energy, and I'm like, okay, what's happening right now? Because I never used to have these considerations in the 9 to 5, because when I clock off, I know I can relax. I'm wondering, how have you found the transition from like being your own boss?
I think the highs are higher and the lows are lower, like exactly what you said. And I think you have to be able to cope with that. I think that's why I took time out. Like I didn't start really working again until I finished it at the end of February. I didn't really start working properly until end of May, June. Like I really needed the time to kind of just reset. And I think, but I would say what I love about it, like I'm not a morning person. Like I've always struggled with being a morning person. I'm definitely a night owl and probably come more, effective like 4 o'clock in the afternoon is probably when I get like my most work done is, you know, and just having the ability to be, that's okay. Like, you know, if my partner is a chef, so he works long hours. So for me, it's fine because he's not here necessarily in the evenings, which means I can sit and work actually when I'm most productive. Whereas before, you know, if I was working and I wasn't going to sit and work till 10, 11 o'clock at night, you know, when everyone else was logging off at 6, just because, you know, it was, I couldn't flex my day that way. So I think it gives you the freedom to maybe flex your day in the way that suits you best. I don't have children, but I think if you have children, the freedom as well around sort of school pickup, drop off and stuff like that. I think it is just being disciplined. You know, having, if you take holiday, it's unpaid generally because you're taking time off, but, you know, making sure you still do stuff like that. And you know, again, being able to work from anywhere, like I was on holiday with family earlier this year, and you bring your laptop with you, and, you know, you might have to say to them, I've got to go and do a couple of hours of calls, you know, but you can sit on a sun lounger and do it and not feel guilty, you know, whereas I think, you know, in the past you would have felt guilty to your family that you were working on your sort of paid time off and you shouldn't have been doing that. But there's kind of like an understanding that, you know, this is your business and your hustle and you have to. But I think it's boundary setting, having the right clients. I think what I love about it as well is if something isn't right, you can walk away from it. You're not bound to it. You know, if you're working with somebody and you know, you can say, actually, you know what, like this isn't working, like, and you can still do that in a way that you retain a positive relationship. But it is that kind of almost try before you buy sort of setup. You know, you can see if you like them, if you want to work with them. Likewise, I always build 3-month review periods into everything I do so that we can have that moment to sit down and say, how is this working? You know, am I delivering what you expect from me?
Like a probation period when it comes to hiring, you can have it when it comes to everything. I have something very similar. Don't think of it like that. Maybe I should, but it's always an initial 3-month period before we like commit for life.
Yeah. And quite often it can be, actually, this is going really well and we need more of your time. And then you kind of have to figure out, okay, you know, how do I juggle that? But I think I'm a big advocate for, like, if you have the ability to do it, you know, and if you're sitting there thinking, I would like to go into consulting or doing more fractional stuff. I think as long as you can set yourself up with the right boundaries, you have a support network who understand, you know, there will be times, you know, I've been on calls at 1, 2 in the morning because I'm working with US clients and trying to set up things with, you know, people in Japan. So you know, you have to work with the client time. You can't, you know, say, no, I want it on my time zone. You know, you have to be accommodating. And I think if you have that, then, you know, that's largely the foundation for success. But it is challenging. And like you said, you know, you get a real buzz when stuff goes right and you win things. And, you know, sometimes I come off calls and I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, I had that passing chat with somebody and I didn't expect it was going to lead to this, and it has, and that's amazing. And then other times you might, you know, put your heart and soul into a proposal or something, and then somebody says, oh, actually, do you know what, we've decided we're not going to do that, you know, and you kind of have to swallow that and think, okay, but ultimately learn from it. But I think it gives some people need the structure of a permanent job. For me, I think I am a little bit of a moth to a flame, and I love the sort of, and I also love the fact that I get to see and work on things that I would otherwise never ever have come across or had the opportunity to be a part of. So I think if that excites you, then you can probably be pretty good and effective at it.
Yeah, for sure. And one piece of advice on that is definitely just speak to people who've done it before, because they tend to be very open. You might not be able to get time from everyone, but if you ask 10 people, someone's going to give you some time. And it's the mistake I see a lot of people make, which is surprising to me, because I guess I've been lucky. I made that very conscious decision early that I will join a community of other people doing it, like find that community, or just find a few other people. Like, I'm sure you, Charlotte, have friends who are in similar positions that you can talk to about this stuff. If you don't, you know, please get some. It's so useful because it's a big shift when you go from working in a company you have all the social network, and then you have no one. And if you work remotely, you might not even have a local community because you moved back in with your parents, which a lot of people are doing now. So like, get some friends online who are just going in the same direction. Like, it will completely change. It just changed everything for me.
Absolutely. And I think I've seen, I know you've done a lot of this in events and online, and there's other people that are running sort of biz dev Discord communities, and even just being part of that. I know a few people that have done sort of meetups in London, where for people who do work remotely, where you can go and sit in an office together for a day and at least have that interaction, because that's the other thing that it can be a bit lonely sometimes. If you don't have a day where you're necessarily working on calls and you're just doing projects, you don't have that sort of company buzz that even when you're working remotely you would have on a Teams channel, where people are asking you questions about things that are not relevant to what you're doing that day. That kind of goes because you are on your own. So I think that's a really good piece of advice. And this industry is friendly. Like, I think for the
honestly
most part,
so friendly.
People want to help. I think like we said earlier, you have to toe the line of when you're pushing, probably for asking for too much. But there's a lot of people out there that will give you guidance on their journey, how they found it. And I've definitely had that this year, because a lot of people, who have been made redundant or decided to move on, have contacted me sort of asking how I went about it. And it's nice. And it's also, I love celebrating other people's success, so if people are doing it and doing it well, like, good for them, and like, stay in touch. And you never know when actually there's a lot of internal referrals that happen as well, where nobody's getting any money for anything. But, I have it. People will come to me and say, oh, we've got this project, we need some assistance. I might not have capacity, or it might not be my area of expertise, but I can say, oh, do you know who you should speak to? And there's nothing in it for me other than it's just good to refer someone that, can do a good job and assist that person. So that definitely is sort of like the hidden undertone, I think, that happens with the consultancy stuff in the industry that people don't see, where everybody's sort of referring one another and making recommendations, which I think is also great. So if you get yourself in a community of people, tell them what you're doing, what you're about, and then you can kind of all help one another
it's a huge
as well.
Part, referral partners, and it can be very big part of your strategy, but it can also just be a nice side bonus as well. So Charlotte, there are so many things we can talk about, and I want to take maybe the rest of our time to, like, is there anything you feel like you need to get off your chest, so to speak? Or is there anything that you feel like we haven't talked about that you'd love to speak about?
I don't think so. I mean, I think more generally, I think consultants or people in fractional capacities are getting a bit of a hard rap at the minute. I've definitely seen that. I've seen some people sort of making comments that, on meet to match platforms or platforms, it's just a bunch of consultants reaching out, or it's just a bunch of consultants attending. And I think people are hoping that, they get to meet with, the big shiny publisher or whoever they're looking to meet with that clearly isn't on there for them. And I think it's important to remember that a lot of, the industry has shifted, and a lot of people that have gone into this space have done so because, the jobs that they were doing before maybe aren't there at the level they were doing them at before, or they want to change, they want to impact all the knowledge they've built up over their career and go and work with smaller teams, smaller businesses in a way that they wouldn't have been able to do before. And I think it's important not to just discredit somebody because they suddenly are setting up as a consultant, having come off of a big job. That doesn't diminish their value or diminish anything about them because they're not in another big job. I think, they probably have a lot more time and a lot more information that they could give than some people that would be in big organizations, because they're out there sort of seeing more just by the nature of the job that they're doing.
I'm sure you've seen that, right? You see 3 or 4 businesses instead of one at a time when it comes to working on problems.
Absolutely. And I think also those people still have really strong, valuable networks that they can lean into, if you speak to them and advice, that they can give. And I think it's just, I had it, to be honest, when I first started, a few comments around sort of being a consultant, and it sort of being, I think, looked down on, that you somehow weren't worth as much as if you were working in a bigger role. And I think it's just important to remember that they're people, they're hustling, they're doing what they can in an industry that's changing and evolving. They're probably learning more than you in some respects. If you're sitting in a singular role, there's a large potential. So I think I'd just like to see some of the negativity towards it kind of dissipate a little bit, and actually just now they are an intrinsic part of our, and they always have been, it's not a new thing.
Just
I think
more
it's
of
just
them, right?
become more prominent. But I think, just support people and don't sort of discredit them just because they don't have a big name against their current position anymore, because you don't actually know who they're working with. They could be working with some of the biggest names in the industry, but they don't tend to shout.
Someone on the podcast who had a very similar situation, so he's probably fine with me sharing it, but we had Marcus Walding maybe a few months after he started consultancy on the podcast, and now he's working fractionally for Blizzard and like 3 other huge publishers. So now he's like the person. But when he expanded on the podcast, like how he got these projects, he was just going to conferences and just having conversations. So I think just for the people at home here, like it's a very important point you're making, where I truly believe like having more conversations can solve pretty much every problem. Like even if it's healthcare, you need to talk to someone to get better at it. And I think anyone who has any challenges, like more conversations with people who know their stuff will never hurt. And I think that is almost like a blessing, where there's more people out there who have the time to maybe have that initial chat, where there's just so much, I guess, learning and opportunity personally. Now that I see the people out there right now who are, willing to give that time or chat to you. So yeah, I think it's a brave new world, I guess. Like it's loads of things are changing.
Yeah, and be kind, because you don't know when you might be finding yourself in a similar position. And so I think
I've got those messages.
They
go
kind.
free, and then they say, "Hey, Harry, any help getting a job?" I'm like, "Here's some resources," but I remember how you treated other people back then.
Yeah, and people remember. They might not say it outwardly, but they do remember those experiences. So I think always this age-old thing, isn't it? Treat others how you wish to be treated. And I think in this market at the minute, especially when job security isn't necessarily that strong, even more so, make sure that you are building that network externally, as you said, those conversations, so that if you find yourself, heaven forbid, in a situation where you do need to pivot or change, you have the ability to do so. But yeah, that's probably the one thing I can think of. I think there's so many other things that are unsaid maybe in the industry that I don't think I should go into, but yeah, I think that, and I did a panel recently, so it's out there publicly, but I think I just want to see more less safe bets and a little bit more, let's get some of the risk back into what we're doing. At the end of the day, we're a creative industry. We should be enabling teams to flourish in creativity and not becoming sort of large accountancy firms. I think it's important that we enable that to still be at the core of what we're doing.
Beautiful. Charlotte, I'd love to know maybe a bit of color. Maybe we should have led with this, but you do so many things. So you're the fractional CCO of Infinite Realms, but you also do this with other companies. So I'm just curious, like day to day, what does that actually mean for maybe someone listening who wants a piece of that, wants maybe some of your attention?
So I think in terms of day to day, so I always say when you're working in sort of like more commercial biz dev, it's quite hard to structure a day as like today is this day, and because if somebody wants a call with you kind of have to. So I whenever I like map out time that I'm spending on a client, I say to them, like, this is not going to be that I'm doing like Mondays, Tuesdays. I will work across the week as in how I'm able to, given what we're working on at that time. And there are times when, if you're doing a day a week for somebody, and it might be quiet one week just by the very nature of what you've done the week before, and then suddenly you might find it ramps up quite significantly, and you're actually then spending 2 or 3 days. You're kind of making up that time. And I think that's very much working on a trust basis with, if they can see the output, they can see the deliverables, you're providing what they need. I think then that kind of exists there, for them to feel that they're getting the value for money. And as I said, there can be times when that time print can change. It might be that 3 months in they realize they don't need as much of your time, or actually we need more. And how do you manage that? So I think at the minute I'm pretty full in terms of what I'm doing. I do a couple of things on the side as well with like I'm on the Great Ormond Street Hospital Gaming Board, so I've got other stuff outside which is non-paid that I love doing, which also takes up time. But I think I'm always interested and open to hearing, because it might not be that now is the right time, but you never know, in 3 months' time something might open up when I'm finishing a project, when I could come in and deliver something, or I could potentially recommend somebody else I know who's starting out in a fractional capacity or working as a consultant, or even referring them into a business that they might be able to speak to and, to help with it. So I think even though I'm kind of, you're busy, I never ever take away the opportunity to learn about new projects or new potential clients or partners, because it might be that right now isn't the right time, but you never know in sort of 6 months time where that might be, or where that project might be going, and how you can be a part of it. So yeah, and I think I'm just excited by anything that's kind of has high growth potential, passionate teams, people doing things that are a bit different, and where they need somebody who can come in, who's got a background in publishing, in service providers, with a network, who can look at it sort of and say, right, how do we take this from here to here? How do we get this to the next level? And some of the stuff I'm doing that's from zero to something. Other businesses I've been working with, it's from a solid foundation to like, how do we go to the next level and grow it even further? So I think ultimately with me, everything's about driving revenue, driving growth, but in a sort of sustainable, people first way. Is kind of how I guess I pitch myself, which is again really hard to do, and I've been doing this for a long time and I still don't really know how to do it. So I don't think you ever get that perfect. But yeah, so if anybody finds themselves with those kind of projects, I'd love to hear, and if I can't help, then I'll always try my best to give some advice or find somebody who can.
Beautiful. Charlotte, how can people get in touch?
LinkedIn is always good, or my email is charlotte@consultancy.co.uk. So I think that's on my LinkedIn as well, but LinkedIn's probably your best bet, where I spend a lot of my time.
Beautiful. Great. Charlotte, thank you so much. Really excited to get this out there, actually. Alrighty. Charlotte, thank you so much. Everyone at home, if you've enjoyed this, definitely go and follow Charlotte. She is active on LinkedIn, does some very nice event breakdowns as well. And yeah, maybe subscribe, send this to a friend. Alrighty. Goodbye, everyone.